All right. Hi, everyone. I am Cheryl Evans with the Wicked Title Forum, and with me today is Paul Augustine. He is a real estate agent with RE/MAX, and we're here to talk about the NAR lawsuit and what that's going to mean for, well, all of us. So, Paul, thanks for joining me today.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Happy to talk about it. And I mean, we're catching wind day by day of what, it's going to be a bit until the dust settles on what the lawsuits actually apply to the industry. But I think we're starting to get our head wrapped around it a bit here, at least, at our office and in the community in general locally, and kind of get our heads wrapped around what the next steps really look like and how we move forward in our practices. Right. So, a mortgage lender that I do a lot of work with last week or the week before sort of give the analogy of 2008, 2009, when there was a whole Dodd-Frank Act thing kind of going into place. It was a very similar kind of scenario in the lending space as what we might be seeing in the real estate space. But I would say that Sitzer chose to try this lawsuit in Missouri and in Texas for reasons. When you look at their associations forms and contracts, buyer representation, seller representation contracts, those states inherently were not as clear when it came to compensation as maybe Pennsylvania is, for example. So I know you have title reps that are working in many, many states, but here in Pennsylvania, the one thing is when you look at buyer agency and seller agency or listing contracts, they pretty clearly spell out compensation. Now, how well does an agent explain that to their clientele? I mean, listen, I've heard plenty of novice buyers agents say to their buyers, "Hey, you don't have to pay for anything. I'm going to work for free. The seller's just going to pay me." Well, that wasn't always true, right? So I think that, when you look at the immediate kind of implications of what this is going to mean for practitioners, moving forward, you have to be real clear about the different ways you may be compensated if you're representing a buyer. There always was a menu of options for home sellers, right? So all the headlines we're seeing now is like sellers don't have to pay 6%. Sellers don't have to. Well, guess what? They never had to. There was always an array of options, right? You could sell it yourself and pay nothing. You could sell it yourself, and if a buyer's agent came along, offer them compensation if you wanted to bring their buyers through, right? You could hire a limited service broker and pay a small flat fee for that MLS entry only service, and then offer buyer broker comp of any level that you wanted to. Or you could go full service, and pay. There was a scale on that, right? So 6% was never like a must pay. So it's interesting to be at ground zero of a mainstream media headline and kind of see how misrepresented the story actually is. It's just because to show you how misrepresented things are across the board, right? So but what we know now is that there will need to be more clarity in those relationships with buyers and with sellers alike. And so how does that play out? Time will tell, industry wide. I mean, in Pennsylvania, there'll probably be some modification to our PAR, or the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors forms. They may have to modify a clause or two in the compensation paragraphs of those agreements. But like I said, largely they're pretty well structured to begin with. It if you look at a buyer's agency agreement right now, it sort of pretty clearly spells out that if you're buying a home, there's a couple different ways that your broker, your rep, could be comped. Could be through compensation offered by the listing broker. Now it may say listing broker or by seller, depending on how that plays out. Or if you're buying a property that's not listed with a broker, here's how it's paid. And then there's a subparagraph that states that any compensation not earned by broker or by seller that was agreed to, buyer will pay the difference. So we're pretty well mapped out as far as that goes. I think it's just a matter of agents getting a little more clear on how that actually plays out and explaining those scenarios to their clients. So
making sure those buyers understand that maybe they're now in a world that they're more likely to have to make up some or all of that difference.
Right.
Whereas in the past, that was more uncommon.
Yep. And so, and this is something I've always, for years, I've sort of explained it to our buyer clients. We've always established that relationship up front. I think as agents, you've got to get really clear now on what your value proposition is to your buyers, right? It's not, as the industry perception is, it's a free service. It never was, right? But just being able to really communicate that value to your clients and explain to them, hey, if you decide you're going to commit to working with me and we enter in that relationship, this is all the stuff I'm going to do for you, right? So it's not just like opening lock boxes and getting me in and out of doors. There's so much more to it. So do you know what you do? Do you believe in what you do? And can you communicate that well enough to a buyer client that they're going to feel comfortable making that signed commitment to you that, hey, best case scenario, we find a property that, either the seller or the seller's broker is offering some kind of compensation to a buyer's rep, or worst case, they're offering none. And if they're offering none, we're going to pay you full free. Like, is there enough of a value prop there that your client's going to feel like it's worth signing on with you? So you just have to get crystal clear on that and really good at it, right?
Yeah, I think that's going to really make the difference in, who survives these changes and who maybe falls out of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think for consumers and for our industry alike, it's going to be a good thing in the long run, right? Because consumers will want, I think because a buyer may have a little more at stake in entering into those relationships now than they would have before. They're going to be a little more selective about who they're working with. So, and then I think agents have got to get real crystal clear on what it is that they're doing to help their clients and get good at communicating that and then delivering it, frankly, right? So I don't know. I mean, I think there's a part of me that says that, like, the industry needed a bit of a flushing out of the folks who got in just because they thought it was going to be easy money. They weren't in here to really create a great service model and a great customer service experience. And so, to title agents, and I know we're going to get to this in a minute, but, how do you kind of navigate through these changes? There's a couple insights I have there, but the one thing I'll say is that, I mean, to me, it always feels like, Pareto principle, right? Like 80% of the business is done by 20% of the population of real estate agents. Probably same true in the title space, right? And in every industry, real estate, there's been an argument that like 93% of the list side inventory is actually gotten by 7% of the agents in the marketplace, meaning there's a dominant number of list agents, right? And so maybe a little like a higher ratio, right? Like, in other words, there may be more business done by actually a smaller cut than 80-20. So what do you do? Well, who's that? If it is 80-20, who's that 20%? And those are the ones you got to work building the relationships with, right? And maintaining them. So do you
think there's going to be a downward pressure on the commission rates?
I don't know. I mean, now it's kind of like you sort of almost get into a scenario where it's like it's each party's paying their own rep. So it could go a lot of different ways. I think listing agents, we talked about buyer's agents, but I think listing agents they always had to be a little more crystal clear on what they were doing. For a seller, I always felt like, of the two sides of the business, you need a little bit more skill on the list side for sure. More people getting into the industry. They're probably more heavy buy side, when they first get in.
Your involvement on the buy side, I think, is a little more visible.
Yeah.
You're there walking them through a house. They know what you're doing because they're watching it happen.
Yep. I think, on the list side, your market expertise, perspective on the market, understanding, those bumps in the road that a home seller might kind of hit along the way, depending on market conditions, being able to communicate clearly to them. You understand what those problems are, and then coming to the table with some solutions. That's where you really earn your keep as a listing agent. And that's still going to be true. So will there be downward pressure? I mean, listen, there's always going to be a small camp of home sellers who don't want to pay anybody at all, or they want to pay the cheapest thing possible. Ironically enough, if you look at the market data, I've been in the business for 20 years. So I got in almost 20 years. I got in 2005. And you look at the statistics, it was 16% of home sellers sold for sale by owner or off market. Half of that 16%, so 8% of the overall market, was an family transaction. So they knew who was going to buy it anyway, right. Meaning only 8% of the market, in all these market conditions, buyer's market, seller's market, decided to do it themselves. So my point is, like, it's still a complicated process that most consumers are going to want to hire professional help for. And there will always be people who are willing to do it for a discounted or a reduced, less than the other competitors. It's the old adage that you get what you pay for, right? So it's like, hey, I could pay $900 flat fee and have somebody just put my thing in MLS, and then I'm just going to have to navigate every other thing, including negotiating on my own behalf, getting people through my door, making sure it's safe and secure for those people to come through, vetting them out financially. So if I can do all that stuff, then I can do it for next to nothing. Or I can take somebody who's been dominant in my market for 30 plus years or 40 years, find those people who actually really know my market well and who I know are going to net me more in the end, and pay them a little more to do it, right? So I think it's going to give consumers more choice, but in the end, does it wind up creating an across the board reduction in fee for service? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, the ones who know their value are going to earn it, right? So
I think we might see a little bit more variety. I know in the
Yeah.
tech space, the good, better, best model has worked really well for pricing services.
Mhm.
Any software app you go on to, you usually are presented with three options,
Yep.
three price points, three levels of service that you get for it. And I really wouldn't be surprised if we started seeing that kind of service offering within the real estate world too. And psychologically, it's proven to be a really successful model. So it'll be interesting to see how people start packaging up what they have to offer,
Mhm.
and in order to maybe capture the people at various price points and affordability. But talking about affordability, there's a lot of talk about home buyers not being able to afford to buy into the market in the first place, and certainly increasing their closing cost could be a barrier. Are you hearing anything about the lending industry maybe making some adjustments to be able to finance the increased costs for the buyers, or any
That's a
signs for
great
that?
question, Cheryl. Yeah, and I think we will see some of that stuff unfold in the months ahead. So, what will Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and then ultimately, VA, FHA, Department of HUD, what will they approve as far as closing cost concession or lender credit type concessions to cover some of those costs? It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Because
Yeah,
for sure, I mean, there's going to be certain price ranges or certain certain buyer pools who are going to be like, man, I barely had enough to cover the basic transaction costs, and now I've got to look at, paying my agent, whatever fee that is they agreed to, X percentage
yeah,
of or X dollars, to rep. Boy, that's a whole other added transaction cost, So I think that there will be a segment of buyers are actually absolutely impacted by it, and so there's a couple different ways that may be able to be structured. It could be a system where, I mean, but the fact is, like I was going to say, it could be a scenario where a seller concession is gotten to cover that added transaction cost, but the market's tight and it's competitive as it is. So it's going to be difficult to do, right? If you're in a multi-offer
yeah,
market, what's your batting average on getting a seller to pay enough concession for you to cover your agent's representation fees and such? So yeah, I'll be interested to see there's some loan programs that come out to kind of help subsidize that a bit. There will be other price ranges that frankly won't be impacted by it. They're just like, hey, look, it's another X amount of dollars I've got to come to the table with. So, and I think it's one of those things that agents might say to them, hey, look, you've got a best case and a worst case scenario. Our best case is we find a property where the seller is offering buyer broker compensation. Then you don't have that added cost, or they don't, and then you have all that added cost. So it's that's that two-tiered kind of like best case, worst case, or maybe an in-between type of thing. So it'll be interesting. But to your point, yeah, I mean the market's been running away appreciation wise. Rates have kind of been on the rise. So all these things, you just add all these added costs to kind of at some point, what is the breaking point? I don't know that this, restructuring of comps for agents in the industry is going to be the tipping point where the market shifts. But I could see where, maybe the pool of buyer on a particular property is a little narrower just because, there's, hey, that seller's not offering any kind of comp, and it happens to be a property in a price range where people are tight on cash anyway. So they just eliminated half of their buyer pool by not offering. I don't know. You know what I mean? Time will tell.
yeah.
So
Yeah, we could really see some differentiation in different price points and in different regions, as far as how that plays out. I'm really afraid that our vets are going to be hit hard, because my understanding right now is that VA loans specifically forbid the borrowers from paying a commission. And
right.
so if you've got a situation where sellers are no longer required to, and it's a competitive market and they don't have to offer a commission to the buyer's agent
Mhm.
in order to get deals in the door, you could see the vets being put at a real disadvantage in that
Mhm.
case. So I hope the VA does, adjust quickly to that situation.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, I mean, there's some work to be done there to change, alter guidelines to keep that. It's such a great program too. Like I love it.
Yeah.
The interest rates are super competitive. The no PMI feature, even on a 0% down payment loan. I don't know if there's another program in the marketplace. I mean, I'm not a lender, but I see
Yeah,
enough
but they're
of it.
few and
That's
far
the only one I know
between.
of that. Yeah. So
Yeah. And I'm also afraid that we're going to see, especially in the lower price points, a lot more buyers going unrepresented. And, I don't think that does any favors for consumers. But, if push comes to shove and they can't finance the cost in, They may try to go it alone, or you might see some more dual agency, and that's going to depend on the different states and what they allow and don't allow. But here in Pennsylvania, dual agency is permitted, and buyers are the ones who pick the title company. So I could certainly see, for our title agents who are watching this, a need to actually start going out and educating consumers on what is title and marketing to consumers, whereas in the past, largely the focus has been marketing to real estate agents to be referral partners. But if you do have more buyers who aren't using a buyer's agent and don't have somebody guiding them through that process and making recommendations, the title companies may need to step in there. And I hope that's not the case. I see the value in having a buyer's agent. I've always worked with one myself, but that could definitely be an angle that the title agents need to look at and how they adjust to this market. But what else would you say to these title agents? They want to be doing business with that 20% who's doing 80% of the business, or the 7% doing 93% of the business. So how can they help make sure that the real estate agents that they already work with, already receive referrals from, are part of that upper tier that, survives the shakeup, still is in the business in a couple of years and is thriving? What, if anything, can they do to help support them?
So I'll give you a couple of ideas or insights, and I'll share with you the things I like about the agency that I do a lot of work with. And I think probably a lot of title reps, they have an affiliation with a real estate office of some sort. They probably can take a look at office production and see, who are the top agents in that office that they're working out of, or that's one of their base camps, right? So if I was in that industry, the first thing I'd look at is like, who are the agents who are listing and selling the most properties in that office or that market center, right? Do I already have a relationship with them? Am I already helping their buyers with their title work? And if I'm not, how can I bring value to them? Is just to get my foot in the door for those opportunities. How can I help them on the listing side of the business? So one example, like when we're listing properties for sale, if it's an estate sale or it's a sale where the seller is being rep by a power of attorney, one of the first things we'll do is we'll go to our title rep and say, hey, we're listing this property. Here's a copy of the POA. If this file came across your desk, would this be an okay power of attorney? We know some of the older ones don't have the agent acknowledgement, for example, or they just weren't written properly, or the language on, transfer of real property and the duties, pointed to agent. Are they specific enough to allow that seller, that power of attorney seller, to convey? We want to find that stuff out before the property even goes on market, because once it goes to contract, if we've got a POA that's needed to be modified, we'd rather know that up front. So, kind of offering those sort of services to your listing agent, saying, hey, look, if you got a file and it's a complicated thing, get the info to us and let us kind of get a review on it. We'll let you know what our underwriter would say if that was our file, And
well, that's a good point, to do that seller side consult. Now, you may not end up with that transaction, but you're building that relationship with the real estate agent, so you get the buy side.
And we lean into that all the time, because I'm going to tell you that 30% of our business over the past several years anyway, on the listing side, has been that estate sale / power of attorney sale type of scenario. So you always have those documents, and you're like, are these going to be okay? Is there anything that needs to be altered? Some POAs don't give us broad medical power of attorney powers, things of that nature, whatever be the case. Or we'll list something that's maybe got, like we had one very recently, the property had a recorded, we knew how to record it right away, our common driveway. We just didn't know specifically what the obligations were of each of the property owners, kind of like leading up to our house, which happened to be at the very back of this common driveway. And so we wanted to get a copy of that and all the language pertaining to it, to actually attach it as one of our disclosure statements, like a part of our disclosure statement, so that the buyer knew what were they going to be responsible for if they bought this house with a common driveway. So our title rep went, called the searcher, said, hey, can you grab this this easement, or this this maintenance agreement, and grab a copy of it. So we grabbed that, like stuff like that we can't necessarily track down easily on our own. We'll lean into them all the time. Now, having said that, we wouldn't just use them for that. So most agents are not going to, be like, oh, I'm only going to use them when I have a listing and I need stuff. Eventually, they're going to reciprocate. Like, hey, they're really helpful on the listing side. They know their stuff. Now I've got a buyer because I've got all these listings, and now buyers are called, right? So now buyers are calling me direct because they want to work with the listing agent. And you might see a little more of that in this environment. And so, if you've got a good relationship with those heavy listing agents in your marketplace, Well, then when you get the buyer opportunities, maybe they lay up that introduction to you and it actually turns into some business, right? So that would be an angle I would play a little bit if I was in the title space,
Yeah, with the potential downward pressure on commissions and perhaps some agents leaving the industry, I could certainly see the brokers feeling some pressure as well. Do you think we're going to see even more affiliated business arrangements? I mean, I know our market's pretty saturated already with that, but for any markets that aren't, do you think that may also be kind of a way that they're going to balance the books? To make up for some of that lost revenue?
It could be. What I would say to you is I think that I think the agents, the real estate agents who leave the industry first, Cheryl, are going to be the ones who are frankly kind of producing the least already. So
I agree.
I think that the ones who are now the exception to that, and listen, I'm 44 years old, so I'm far from this zone, but let's just say hypothetically it was 20 years from now and this big industry change had come after market shift after market shift after market shift. And I was just kind of running my practice because I enjoyed it. It was smooth sailing. And then this came along. I might be like, you know what? I don't need to deal with this anymore. I've made enough adaptations to my business. I'm out. Like you might see a camp of some more seasoned producing people leave just because they're like, this is just
retired.
One change too many. I'm tired and now I'm retired, right? But
yes.
So you have a small camp that exit for that reason. But I think the larger representation of agents leaving the industry are going to be our lower level producers, frankly,
Yeah.
And man, listen, I feel bad for them because I remember when I got back into business into the business in 2005, how much optimism I had and how, and I have to say, looking back at it, I think that there was some technology, but not nearly as much as there is today. So I think that has really, it's simplified things for consumers and, maybe taking the keys away from us as agents and brokers. Like we're not the keeper of the inventory anymore. That's not the thing we have. So now you have to actually be a deliverer of a great process and a guide through all those complications. And so until you're seasoned, you have some experience, it's hard to say you really know your way around every little step of the process. So my point is, it's probably a little harder now as a new agent to kind of get traction and really get going. And then you look at the market over the last several years, how incredibly competitive it's been on the buy side. And most agents start their careers predominantly representing buyers. Boy, it's been tough sledding already. And now you've got this on top of it. So I think, you're going to have a lot of those newer people never really got traction getting out. But then the seasoned people who are already good at, and just, listen, we're in the business of having difficult conversations. So I don't know if this is necessarily a super difficult conversation to have with consumers, but it's the type of thing that maybe somebody who's newer is going to be a bit uncomfortable with on top of everything else and just say, hey, this is getting a little too tricky for me. I'm out, So, will we have people exit? Sure. Will it be a heavy camp of current producing agents? No, I don't think it will be, So yeah.
Yeah. So it may not affect the push for affiliated business arrangements.
One thing that that I know myself and my team always say is that we surrounding ourselves but with great professionals that we use on basically every transaction, it enhances our ability to create a great customer service experience. So my business is heavily predominantly referral and repeat based. So 95% of our business comes to us repeat referral, right? So how do you earn that? And the industry reports 41% in that same category, meaning the average agent says 41% of the business comes repeat and referred. So how do we get at that, those ratios that high? It's by intentionality. It's being connected with great professionals so it's like we're delivering a great real estate buy sell experiences as agents, but then we want our title reps to do the same, and our insurance agent and our lenders and our, the attorneys.
Yeah, because it all reflects, if people don't always know who to point the finger at and blame when something goes wrong. And so, if you're working with somebody else who hasn't held up their part of the good customer experience, it can reflect negatively on you, even if it had nothing to do with you. So certainly, I think that's in any market, in any conditions, always good advice that, you're providing the best experience for the customers, because that makes everybody look good.
Yep. And like the title reps we work with, they're great at that. Just the communication piece of it. When one of our clients has a question on, anything, they're always very responsive to it. They're friendly. Even though this is like stuff we do day in and day out in our sleep, you have to remember that things we view as the most basic questions or things people don't have a clue about, use that as an opportunity to show them, what you're talking. Don't ever kind of like, brush it off as like, oh gosh, this question again. It's like, well, be glad they're asking you simple questions and answer them in a friendly manner, right? Like, it just kind of give that customer a good experience. Your agents appreciate that. And again, you're creating that referral repeat cycle. So I can tell you what happens now is we get clients who call us between their moves. They're not moving, but they're like, hey, I want to refi, or I want to, I need a recommendation to a contract, or whatever it is. They lean into us for that. So guess what? We keep good records of our files. So we're like, hey, you're doing that refi, reach back out to the title rep that did your purchase. So how do you create that repeat business? It's like, create a good purchase experience first, and then you have the opportunity for those refi experiences, because that's coming, right? So that's the one thing I won't, reap any reward in per se, right? But like title reps and lenders, you're going to have a bit of a season here, maybe later this year, but I think for sure in 2025, where there's going to be a little bit of a wave of refis, maybe not a boom, but it's going to bring some additional.
They'll come back at least, because the last couple of years they've been pretty much non-existent.
Yep. So, I thought, again, if I was in the title business, I think I'd be kind of keeping, at least if I don't already have a robust CRM that keeps track of who bought and ran about what rate they had, their purchase loan was. And again, you may not be able to do all this stuff. There may be some compliance stuff. I'm like, it's
not that I'm aware of. I think you could track it.
Yeah, but it might be a thing where like, hey, they bought at 7.5% or 8%. Now interest rates are 6%. Well, guess what? That might be a buyer who's getting ready to do a refi. Maybe there's some kind of campaign you put together that's just like, hey, we're your title rep. When you go to refi, reach out to us, because whatever the thing you offer to your refi, clients that did their purchase file, let them know it exists, because they could go anywhere for the refi, but try to capture some of that stuff,
Absolutely. And maybe it's an opportunity for, co-marketing with the lender who was involved in that transaction. And more teamwork, I think is going to be key for everyone. And I know one of the topics of conversation in the title industry has been around technology and AI and how that's kind of impacting the back office of title operations. And, the one thing I keep hearing over and over again is, customer service is key. And let's embrace that technology. Let's embrace those automations where we can for those repetitive back office things that used to be very manual and maybe don't need to be anymore. And that frees up your staff to provide that better, more hands-on customer service experience. And I do think that's going to become more and more key as time goes on for lots of reasons.
I agree with you. I think that you have to watch over automation. I've had that experience. And again, I'm just observations as an agent who's involved in transactions on both sides. Sometimes you get like over automated communication from title agencies that are not ours. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is overboard. It doesn't matter to me. I'll just like, if it's another email I don't need to view, I'll click and delete. But just understand that you want to always make sure it feels like there's still a personal touch to it, even if there's some automation to it. That's all,
Yeah, definitely. And some of that is consumer facing to the other people in the transaction professionals and buyers and sellers. And then some of the tech that's coming into the title industry is very much behind the scenes and automating, examination of the title and preparing the title commitments and things like that. So there's been some interesting work there, but
one idea too, Cheryl, I have, and this is something we're working on internally on our like home buying, home selling processes. Everybody in every industry's got a set of frequently asked questions. Their customers or their clients ask it every single time. I don't know, 5, 6 most frequently asked questions. Start with that. And so think about maybe doing like a short, like a video series, like, how should I take tenancy to my home? That's probably something that, joint tenant versus, tenant in common or whatever that is. Like a 30-second to 1-minute video on, hey, how should I take title to my home? And then here are the few different ways. And these are the advantages and disadvantages of it. And then, if you're unsure, talk to your estate planning attorney, whatever that caveat is. But like automate some of that stuff and send it out in the point on the transaction loop where the customer is going to ask that, and like carbon copy in their agent, right? Like, so, again, it's about creating that customer service. You want to talk about an automation that's of value, something like that I could see being useful. And then like the agents be like, whoa, that's really cool. They just saved me from having to answer a question I'm not really great at answering. And it saved the phone, not that you mind talking to your customers, but if you can automate some of that, so think
Yeah.
about those sorts of things, or what to expect on closing day, you know what I mean? And do a quick video
Yeah.
on that, you know what I mean? So,
Absolutely. One of the really interesting places where I've seen it is actually an AI chatbot. And I've had some really interesting conversation with title agents about the idea of implementing an AI chatbot, and they were very concerned about putting AI in a customer-facing situation. And in this particular situation, I actually think it can be really beneficial. I've seen ones that tie into the title production software. And so those, like you said, there are those handful of questions that everybody asks in every transaction. Like,
yep.
when is closing? What day? What time? What location? Those
Mhm.
very specific pieces of data. And when you've got that AI chatbot that can tie into your title production software, so that when the question is asked, it can go and pull the accurate piece of information from your file and deliver it back to the buyer, seller, agent, whoever's asking. And when you can automate those pieces of hard data that are very frequently asked questions, again, it frees you up to more quickly answer the phone, answer the email for the more involved, more important questions that really do need a human to explain and help somebody understand what's going on and guide them through decision making. And so that actually can be an automation that is really beneficial because it gets people answers faster,
Yep.
both in those common ones and in the uncommon questions.
Yeah. And listen, if you're going to really take on that project, I would encourage you also to collaborate with your top agents. Who are your top referring agents right now? Just say, hey, listen, you mind if we grab lunch? I want to pick your brain on this little project we're working on, see what you think of it. And just bounce
Yes.
past them like, hey, what are the 4 or 5 questions you'd like to see us answer in this series? What are people asking you about a lot? We can help you by giving a good, clear answer on it in a 1 to 2 minute video. And
Yep.
and kind of it shows that the agent then that like you care about making the overall customer experience a positive one for one, and then you're going to get some
Yeah.
feedback. Like, look, people always ask me, why should I get enhanced versus basic, or what's owner's
Yes.
coverage versus lender's coverage? Whatever those questions are, you probably know what they are, but like just it's always double check with the people who are kind of also you're working alongside those agents and brokers you're working with and see what they have to say about it, what they would want you to cover, basically.
Oh yeah, I've seen some really interesting workflows where title agents have worked very closely with real estate agents, loan officers to put together a comprehensive customer experience from the point of signing the contract through settlement, where everybody's email communications and timelines and things have been coordinated so that nobody's sending out duplicate information,
Mhm.
and it kind of all makes sense and supports each other rather than everybody sort of doing their own thing. And when they've pulled it off, it's been really powerful.
I like that. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, very neat. All right. Well, Paul, I really appreciate you sharing your views on everything. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I mean, the only other thing I thought of, and and again, this is more like probably the inside baseball stuff I don't know the first thing about, but like I'm wondering how it's going to play out. Like right now, like we as agents, we spell out those compensation structures in our agency agreements, our representation agreements. But I know that like when we're right now anyway, when we're sending like our charges to the title companies that are doing the file, if it's a listing of ours, we're sending it to the buyer's title company. If it's our buyer, we're sending it to our title company. And they're basically just asking us like, what are your charges? Does that have to change? Like, well, from a liability standpoint, well, like all your underwriters now say, look, you need a paper trail of like, I don't even know what that looks like. We need to see what the seller's comping in the state comp form. And then we need to see that the buyer agreed to pay the difference before we put it on the sheet or something. I don't know if there's going to be complications because of that. That's just some I
I
thought
haven't
of.
heard any.
Yeah,
Typically, title agencies just follow whatever it is each real estate agent tells them should
got it.
be on the settlement sheet. So as long as they're providing something in writing saying, this is what it is,
Yeah.
then it's probably fine because ultimately it's that signature on the final settlement sheet that is, the buyer and seller are both attesting that they have looked over all those numbers and they are in agreement that those numbers are accurate for the transaction.
Mhm.
So yeah, you probably won't see a whole lot in terms of changes to that process. And, just make sure that you do have it in writing, and I think most real estate agents already do.
Yeah. Only other thing I would say is just I personally, what I've learned over the years, I think earlier in my career, I dreaded market shifts and market challenges. I love them now because I think it really puts your current systems, processes, your customer service model like to the test, and your ability to communicate to the test too. And so I think
Yeah.
I love a good challenge because it kind of flushes the industry out a little bit, and
Yeah.
the professionals will rise. So I think again, and in the title space, just look at like who are the A players in your industry right now? Are you doing business with them? If not, how do you get your foot in the door on that? And I'd be campaigning that like crazy. If you do that, you'll thrive. And I do think, to your point, Cheryl, you may see at least a small camp of buyers say, boy, I just can't afford to have my own agent, so I'm going to have to call listing agents. Well, if you're a title rep and you've got a good relationship with the best listing agents in your market area, you might have opportunities on catching some of that business. I mean, those are my
Yeah.
few thoughts on it, and just get crystal clear on communicating your value. But we should always be doing that, all of us, no
Yeah.
matter what we do, and I think that this is just a season of getting better at that. That's really just, view the challenge as an opportunity is what I'm saying.
Yep. Yep. Sounds good. All right. Well, Paul, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
Absolutely.